Welcome to This Explainer. Okay, today we are diving into the mind of a guy who literally needs no introduction. But, while everyone knows his name, his actual playbook is constantly misunderstood. We're going to trace the evolution of Warren Buffett. We're looking at exactly how he grew his wealth from a kid hustling door to door in Omaha to becoming the architect of just a staggering financial empire. We'll be uncovering the exact strategies, the pivots, and those timeless rules that made him the world's most successful investor. Okay, let's dive into this. $165 billion. That is Warren Buffett's estimated net worth today. It's a massive number, right? Yet what makes this fortune so fascinating is the incredible contrast with how the guy actually lives. I mean, he still lives in the exact same house in Omaha that he bought decades ago. He grabs McDonald's for breakfast on his way to work, and his base salary, it's been a modest $100,000 for years. He didn't inherit this wealth, and he didn't build some crazy tech startup. He simply won, consistently, in the stock market over 8 decades. So, how did he pull this off? Here is our roadmap for This Explainer. 1. The making of an oracle. 2. The cigar butt era. 3. The Charlie Munger pivot. 4. The Berkshire Hathaway engine. And 5. Timeless rules for winning. Let's get right to it. Part 1. The making of an oracle. Our story starts back in Nebraska. Born in 1930, right after the Great Depression completely devastated the economy, young Warren learned the value of a dollar real quick. Sparked by a library book he found on making money, he didn't waste any time. Get this, at age 6, he was buying 6 packs of Coca-Cola from his grandfather's grocery store and selling them door to door for a profit, along with chewing gum and magazines. Then at age 11, in 1942, right after Pearl Harbor, when the economic outlook was absolutely bleak, he bought his first stock, City Service, for $38.25. It immediately tanked to around $27. But he patiently held on until it recovered to $40 and sold it for a tiny profit, only to then sit back and watch it rocket to $200 shortly after. It was a super painful but totally vital lesson in patience. By 15, he and a buddy were buying used pinball machines for $25 and splitting the profits with local barbershop owners. He later said about those days, "I'd become a capitalist and it felt good." And honestly, you can see why. By the time he was in high school, thanks to his paper routes and that whole pinball empire, he was making today's equivalent of thousands of dollars and even bought himself a 40-acre farm. But he knew he needed to scale up. After college, he was actually terrified of public speaking, like he literally threw up from nerves. But he forced himself to take a public speaking course, which he still calls the best investment he ever made. That newfound confidence eventually led him to Columbia Business School, where he got to study under the father of value investing himself, Benjamin Graham. Part 2. The cigar butt era. Returning to Omaha in 1956, Buffett launched his own partnership. He had about $105,000 pooled from family and friends, but amazingly, he only put in $100 of his own cash. So the crucial point here is how he invested it, using a strategy he learned directly from his mentor, Ben Graham. It's called cigar butt investing. Just picture walking down the street and finding a discarded cigar. Look, it's ugly, it's basically dead, but there's one last free puff left in it. Buffett would go out and hunt for unloved, declining companies whose stock prices were just ridiculously cheap. So cheap that the liquid assets they held were worth more than the stock price itself. For instance, he bought heavily into the Sanborn Map Company. It was a declining map maker trading at $45 a share, even though they had a hidden investment portfolio sitting in their vault worth $65 a share. He was essentially buying dollars for 50 cents. But this specific strategy actually led to a massive, completely accidental shift. In the 1960s, he noticed a failing New England textile mill called Berkshire Hathaway. He bought shares as a classic cigar butt play for $7.50. Years later, he struck a verbal handshake deal to sell his shares back to the company's CEO for $11.50. But when the official written offer arrived, the CEO tried to cheat him, offering $11.37. Furious over those 13 cents, Buffett refused to sell. Instead, out of pure spite, he bought up enough stock to take control of the entire company, fired that CEO, and suddenly found himself stuck owning a dying textile business. Part 3. The Charlie Munger pivot. So dealing with that struggling textile mill made Buffett really see the limitations of the cigar butt strategy. Bargains were getting way harder to find in a rising market, and just pouring money into a bad business to keep it afloat, that was a losing game. He needed a totally new approach. And that came courtesy of his brilliant partner, the late Charlie Munger, who challenged his whole philosophy. Munger told him it's better to buy a wonderful company at a fair price than a fair company at a wonderful price. Munger essentially convinced Warren to stop hunting for dying companies in the bargain bin and instead start looking for really high-quality businesses that had a long-term advantage, even if it meant paying a little bit more upfront. This pivot fundamentally changed the entire trajectory of Buffett's wealth.
The absolute cornerstone of this new strategy was the economic moat. Just like a castle uses a water moat to keep invaders out, a great business needs an economic moat. Things like a powerful brand, crazy loyal customers, or super low costs to keep competitors at bay. A perfect early example of this was See's Candies. Buffett actually hesitated to pay $25 million for a regional candy company that only had a few million in profit. It violated all his old bargain rules, but Munger pushed him, pointing out the brand's incredible moat and its ability to raise prices. Buffett caved, and over the decades, See's has generated over $2 billion in profits for Berkshire. Similarly, he bought heavily into American Express when its stock completely tanked during the infamous salad oil scandal, because he realized that the brand trust and consumer swiping habits were totally intact.
And this brilliantly illustrates the sheer power of that strategy. In 1988, after the market crash, Buffett saw a historic brand moat in Coca-Cola. He invested $1 billion, which was a massive chunk of his portfolio at the time. Because Coke's brand is practically unbeatable on a global scale, it just constantly churns out cash. Today, he still holds all those shares, which are now worth over $25 billion, and Coke pays him roughly $700 million every single year just in dividends. Think about that. That's almost his entire initial investment handed back to him annually.
Part 4. The Berkshire Hathaway Engine.
Now, buying great companies is one thing, right? But to scale a fortune into the hundreds of billions, you need a powerful financial engine. And Buffett found it in the insurance business. Companies like Geico, which Buffett ended up acquiring, operate beautifully. People pay their premiums every month. The insurance company gets to hold on to this massive pool of cash, which Buffett calls the float, long before any claims ever need to be paid out. Buffett realized he could take this float, money that didn't even belong to him yet, and aggressively invest it into wonderful companies with wide moats. It gave him an almost infinite pool of capital to compound his wealth. This engine eventually gave him the firepower to hunt massive elephants. For decades, he completely avoided tech stocks because he just didn't understand their moats. But around 2016, that changed with Apple. He didn't view Apple just as a tech company. He saw it as a consumer brand with an incredibly sticky ecosystem. iPhones, the App Store, iCloud. Once people are in, they don't leave. By the end of 2023, his Apple stake grew to make up fully half of Berkshire's entire $350 billion stock portfolio, turning a $30 billion investment into $160 billion.
Part 5. Timeless Rules for Winning.
So what does this all mean for us? Let's pull out some of the timeless rules from Buffett and his mentor Ben Graham's favorite book, The Intelligent Investor, which is a book Buffett claims changed his life at 19. The first rule is knowing the strict difference between investing and speculating. True investing is like buying a house to raise a family in. You check the plumbing, you research the neighborhood, you do your homework. You treat a stock as partial ownership in a real, living business with actual employees and revenue. Speculating, on the other hand, is buying a house just because some guy on TikTok told you prices are going up tomorrow. Chasing dot-com hype in the 90s or meme stocks recently, that's speculating. The rule is simple. If you wouldn't buy the whole business, don't buy a tiny piece of it. Next up is the concept of a margin of safety. Because look, no matter how smart you are, the economy can flip. If you build a bridge for a 10,000-pound truck, you don't engineer it to hold exactly 10,000 pounds. You build it to hold 30,000 pounds, just in case. The exact same logic goes for stocks. You never pay full price. If a company is truly worth $50 a share, you wait to buy it at 30. This gives you serious breathing room if things go wrong. During the 2008 crash, Buffett used his massive cash reserves to act as a financial white knight, buying up phenomenal companies on sale with a huge margin of safety. But you might be wondering, how do you actually find these discounts in the real world? You have to understand Mr. Market. Ben Graham created this brilliant analogy. Imagine you own a really steady, profitable local coffee shop. Every single day, a highly emotional, manic-depressive neighbor named Mr. Market comes in with a wild offer for your business. On day one, he bursts through the doors yelling, "Coffee shops are hot, I'll give you $1 million for this place." Let's move to the next day and see how this builds. On day 2, that exact same neighbor drags himself in, totally miserable, saying, "Coffee is dead, I'll give you $50,000 tops." Would you take him seriously? Of course not. You'd laugh him out of the shop. Yet, when the stock market goes up, people think it's a genius, and when it drops, they panic and sell. Your job is to use Mr. Market's mood swings to your advantage. When everyone is panicking and prices drop, you step in and buy great companies on sale. When everyone is greedy, you just stay patient.
So bringing all these takeaways together, treat stocks like real businesses, always demand a margin of safety, and decide if you want to be a passive, defensive investor just buying index funds, or if you're willing to put in the intense work to be an enterprising investor. But most importantly, maintain emotional discipline. Think of it like a pilot flying a plane through a storm. A good pilot doesn't panic and yank the wheel just because of a little turbulence, right? They stick to their instruments and their system. Set up a system of dollar-cost averaging, keep buying into great businesses, and completely ignore the noise.
As we wrap up this explainer, I really want to leave you thinking about this final question. Warren Buffett absolutely did not get rich overnight. He held on to high-quality businesses with strong moats, he ruthlessly reinvested the cash, and most crucially, he controlled his emotions when everyone else around him lost theirs. He literally just let compounding do the heavy lifting over 8 decades. So I ask you, do you have the patience to build a system and let your wealth compound? Or are you going to let the daily mood swings of Mr. Market dictate your financial future?